Well, hello, school counselors and school counselors to be. Thank you guys so much for coming to my channel, The Inspiring School Counselor. And as you guys know, we're getting ready to get into just the pros and cons from being a teacher and wanting to transition into being a school counselor. And really, you guys, we can even vice versa that thing. Okay, if you've been a school counselor and you're wanting to transition into being a teacher, hopefully with me going through the pros and cons, it will help you make a decision on what it is that you're wanting to do. So if you have not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. And make sure you hit that notification bell so that you can be notified every time I upload a video. All right, you guys, let's get into it. Whenever you're looking into changing from being a teacher to now wanting to pursue school counseling and vice versa, from school counseling to teaching, you have to keep in mind that you will have to have additional education for that, okay? Because when you're looking at school counseling, you have to have a licensure in school counseling, and you also have to make sure you take specific classes, and there's like a praxis that you have to take, all that good stuff, right? With teaching, you have to do that as well, and there's a certain set of classes that you're going to have to take for that. So the first thing you guys can keep in mind is that whenever you're looking at a teacher has to remember less students than a school counselor does. With a teacher, you have your class and get a chance to know really well and really build relationships with them. And that's actually a beautiful thing to be able to do when you're able to follow those students throughout the whole year. And it's just that specific group. Whether you have a class of 10, a class of 20, however many is in your class, you get a chance to really build that relationship with them. Versus if you were a school counselor, you're looked upon as knowing the whole school, especially if you're in that elementary setting. Now, it might get a little bit different whenever you're going up into like maybe middle school and high school, because usually the school counselors are assigned a specific, like a letter of a last name. So that school counselor has to work with that specific group of students. And I love that now they have it where you get a chance to follow those students throughout their years in high school. So that's really cool to be able to do. But otherwise, if you are an elementary school counselor like me, you are looked upon as knowing all the students. So really having to build relationships, and it's going to take even harder to be able to do that because there's so many kids to you being one. Even if you are at a school where you have multiple school counselors, it's still a lot of work because you have a lot more kids that you have to be able to work with. So I know for me specifically, I have about 490 students at my school. Me trying to build relationships with them and really trying to learn their names. Y'all, there's still a lot of kids I still don't know their names. That's just something that you have to keep in mind. I'm actually going to share with you guys. I remember when I was getting evaluated by my principal at my prior school district, and one of the things that she put on, she was basically like, look, I have to put something. But she was like, one of the things that I would love for you to work on is knowing all the kids' names, because whenever she was reviewing my class or evaluating my class, I couldn't remember some of their names. I mean, they were kindergartners, and so these are kids that are just coming in. And so she was just like, I would love for you to just learn their names so it can be more personable. And I'm thinking to myself, like, really? Like, I have 300 and something kids to remember, and this is what you're going to point out. But I'll take it because she's like, I have to find something. Coming into school counseling, really building those relationships, I have to make sure that I'm really being intentional, really utilizing classroom lessons, the opportunity to get into the classroom or the teachers bring the students to me and being able to build that. If you are in middle school and high school, you have to be even more intentional because maybe you can't get into classrooms and do lessons. So you might have to go to the cafeteria where the students are and kind of just build relationships during that time. You just have to be creative with trying to build those relationships. So that is something to keep in mind. Do you want to remember only like maybe 20 kids and build that relationship, through the whole year? Or are you wanting to remember 490 or however many kids is in the school and try to build those relationships with those students? It's up to you. The next thing I want to touch on is when you are a teacher, the only thing that you really have to focus on is like class planning. And what I mean by class planning is like the different things that you're wanting to do with your class, whether it is like Christmas parties or taking them on field trips and those type of things when I'm talking about class planning. Versus when you are a school counselor, you are looked upon as orchestrating school-wide events. And I don't think that's really talked about enough. And really, to be honest, when I was in graduate school, they didn't tell me that part. All right. That's the part they didn't say, where you might have to plan a whole school-wide event on college and career readiness, or you might have to plan a spirit week during Red Ribbon Week or something like that. So that is things that we did not discuss in graduate school. So definitely keep that in mind. It might be a lot more easier trying to plan classroom type of events versus a school-wide event. And depending on how in-depth that event is, you're really going to have to get helped in order for it to flourish and for it to go forward. And you also have to make sure you get permission to make sure it's okay for you to do that specific event. So talking to the principals, talking to the classroom teachers, and whoever else that needs to be involved. So that is something that you definitely want to make sure you keep in mind whenever you are transitioning into, being a teacher to a school counselor. And even from a school counselor to teacher, that might even be better. Instead of you planning school-wide things, you'll be able to focus on just your specific classroom. It won't take as much work versus if it is that you are planning it school-wide. Another aspect of class planning is usually for teachers, you have that set schedule of what you're going to do. So maybe you do phonics in the morning and you do math in the afternoons, and then you have, of course, you have your recess, you have your special areas or related arts areas, all these different type of things that you do through the day. It's your set schedule. That's what you do all the time. It doesn't change unless there's like, a assembly that takes place or something happens in the school and everybody's plans is interrupted, right? But with a school counselor, especially when you're being utilized as you should be, your schedule can change, all right? You can try to plan all day long, but let me tell you, it definitely can get hectic. You're not always doing the same thing. And once again, that's if you're being utilized like you should as a school counselor. Because I do know many school counselors, they aren't being utilized and all they are doing is in a classroom and they are a part of that related arts rotation. And I have experienced that my first year in school counseling, or not even my first year, like my first couple of months when I first, became a school counselor, I was doing that, and then COVID happened. That's a whole nother story. Gratefully, my second year, I was out of the related arts rotation. I didn't have to do that. So, and still yet now that I'm in my new school district, I'm grateful that I'm still yet not in that related arts or special area rotations. If you are more of a structured type of individual, then you might not want to get into school counseling because once again, your schedule could be all over the place. And also as school counselors, your job it varies, and how you're utilized is varying. It varies amongst school districts, amongst just school buildings, amongst school levels. And I'm going to touch more into that a little bit later. But if you are a school counselor and you're kind of getting like tired of just the constant change in your schedule, or you're wanting something that's more predictable, then maybe being a teacher is worth your while if you're looking for more of a set schedule type of thing. And that helps me to segue into my next point, which is teachers' roles are more understood versus school counselors. There's still some understanding that needs to happen. There's still a lot more advocating that school counselors have to do for their role. And I don't know why it's so hard for us as school counselors, and gratefully when you are in a good school district like I am, when you have a great faculty and staff, administration, when you have people that really understand your role, and then you also have someone that advocates for you, like we have a director of student services, and school counselors also fall underneath her umbrella. And so when you have people that also will advocate for you, it just makes things a whole lot easier and your role a lot more understood. And I have to also give God glory, because if it had not been for God placing me where he is, so he gets the glory, number one, because he has really helped me and has really placed me in the areas where I'm at, where I don't have to do a lot of advocating for my role because it's already understood coming in. And so I absolutely love that. Teachers, you know what you're going to do. They know what your job is. If you are a third grade teacher and you are looked upon as teaching ELA or teaching science, there's no question about it. That's what you do. You're not going to be asked to do the whole school-wide scheduling. Like, that's not something that you're going to be asked to do. Versus a school counselor, they're trying to figure out, depending on where you're at and whether or not they know your role and what it is that you should be doing, You could be setting schedules. You can be the one that's giving out the discipline and calling on parents and doing all of these things that you should not be doing as a school counselor. And it really takes you advocating. And if you're not one that is forward and, advocates for yourself, then that could be a little bit hard and could really weigh on you when it is that you are being asked to do things that is outside of your school counselor role. Now, let me also tell you guys this. Face it, no matter where you are, there is going to be some things, and I know this might sound a little bit contradictory, there is going to be some things that you're going to have to do just because it's just a part of us being a family, as in the school setting. We're a village. We got to help make things work. And so there's certain things that you're going to have to do, whether that is lunch duty, car duty, bus duty, whatever it is, you might have to do. But when what you are doing is consuming your day and you're not able to do individual counseling, small groups, and you're not able to teach lessons, and you're being bottled down with paperwork and 504s and all this stuff like that, then you really have to make sure that consider what it is that you're doing and how long you want to do it, and talking to your administration to see if there's changes that can be made. The next thing I want to be getting into is behavior. So as a teacher, when I'm talking about behaviors, the only thing that you really have to worry about is your class behavior. All right. So when it comes down to classroom behavior and dealing with students that have, outbursts, and granted, you cannot control who's going to be in your class or not. So some teachers, they experience like the perfect classroom. All the kids are just always well behaved. But then you have some teachers is that all the kids, they're misbehaved, or majority of their classes like those hard classes, all right? Those have those hard students in there. And so having to deal with that can be, a lot within itself when you're talking about behaviors. I also know when you are a classroom teacher, it's a lot easier to put things in place as far as incentives and helping the kids to really be able to kind of get within the flow of how you run your classroom management and things that they should be doing and what they should not be doing. Like, it's easier for them to get into the routine of however you run your things. Are you still going to be dealing with behaviors? That could still be a thing, but at the same time, you have a little bit more control of how you're wanting to run your classroom versus with a school counselor. Especially if we are coming into the teacher's classroom, we have to adapt most of the time to whatever it is that the teachers are doing. I mean, we can set our own things, but sometimes that can be a little bit rocky, or it can be forgotten, especially if you're not always going into the classroom teaching students. So that's one thing. And that's why it's also so important that the school as a whole is doing the same thing. But depending on where you are, what administration you have, sometimes that's not always the case, where it's more of the teachers have their own thing and they're doing their own thing concerning behavior. So it can be a little slippery slope. As a teacher, you are dealing with just your classroom behaviors. And if you have an issue with a student, you can call the administration, you can call the school counselor, and they can kind of help you deal with that. Hopefully you have a good administration and school counselors that will help you with that. But if you are a school counselor, you're dealing with all behaviors. It can go from screaming and yelling to throwing things at a teacher, throwing things at you, to someone that doesn't want to do their work, and you can be called in all different areas, in all different in all different grades. That is something that you can also keep in mind, is that you need to be well-rounded in the different behaviors that you might face within your school, so that you know how to or what interventions to put in place. If you're one where you think that is overwhelming for you, and being a school counselor, dealing with all those different behaviors, that can be a lot for you, then you might not want to go into it. Versus if you're a teacher and you're like, man, that's nothing, like that I don't mind that, then maybe that is okay for you. Another aspect of that is when you're a teacher, if it's that student that has that one behavior and it's really interrupting, you have to deal with that all day until somebody can come, or until resources or whatever is put in place for that student, or interventions is put in place for that student. But otherwise, you see that kid every day and that's what you deal with. Versus a school counselor, you don't have to see that kid every day, right? you don't have to always deal with that same behavior. Yes, you might deal with the behavior sometime because maybe you're called to that particular teacher's classroom, but that's not something that you always have to deal with. And so that's also something you can keep in mind of whether or not you want to be the teacher and deal with that behavior or those behaviors, or be the school counselor and deal with multiple and not always have to deal with that same behavior every day, for 7 hours, with, of course, breaks throughout the day. The next thing we're going to talk about is workload, okay? So for a teacher, whenever it is, and it depends on how you utilize your time, but most of the time what I hear is that we have a lot of teachers that have to bring their work home, or they are working after hours and staying at the school until like 6 o'clock, and school's over at like 3, right? And so I noticed that their workload can be a lot heavier when you're talking about grading, parent calls, and things of that sort, versus with a school counselor. And once again, it depends on how you're being utilized at your school. Your workload, you don't have to really stay after school and do something unless, of course, a crisis or something came up. But you don't have to worry about grading papers. You don't have to worry about a lot of those different things. I know for me, like, I don't ever take work home. Like, that's something that I don't have to do because, for one, when my lessons are already planned, but I think this has more to do with maybe your work ethic and how you do things. Because I know for me, I like to have my full layout of what I want to do for the whole year in the lessons. That's something that's easier for me to do, and it's ready. And that's also probably why I don't have to take nothing home. But also, I don't have to grade anything. That's something that I don't do. Now, talking about planning, when you are a teacher, you have a certain curriculum or certain things, standards that you have to follow. And it's strict, and you have to get them done at a certain time. There's certain things that you have to meet. Versus if you are a school counselor, once again, I always have to preface with this, it just depends on what school district you're in, what school level you're working with, what administration you have. That's not the case for us. I don't have a certain curriculum that I have to follow. I just put together my curriculum, whatever it is that I'm wanting to use. A lot of my things I grab from Teachers Pay Teachers and different free lessons that's online. And in fact, I just want to let you guys know, I have a video where I show you guys a lot of free lessons that you can go and grab, especially for my new school counselors out there. But that is something that I don't have to, worry about. Yes, we do have standards, and whenever I'm doing my lessons, I have to make sure that I have my standards. And yes, there is certain things that I have to talk about, like child abuse, career and college readiness, academic success, so bullying. Like, those are core things I have to talk about. I can do them at whatever time throughout the year that I want to. Versus teachers, you have to hit certain things at a certain time. Also, since we're touching on lessons, whenever you are a teacher, you're teaching more of those core academic subjects. So math, science, reading, social studies, like those type of things. Versus when you are a school counselor, you're morely talking about like social emotional learning. So you're really diving into the feelings and the emotions, and you're teaching more of college and career readiness lessons. You also might be touching on academics, but it's more of from like study skills, organization, good test taking skills. So those are things that you're morely focused on whenever you are a school counselor. Is it that you want to teach more academic, math, science, reading, or do you want to do more of that social emotional learning type of lessons and career and college readiness? Another thing that I want to bring up is that when you are a teacher, you're more apt to build relationships with the parents of your students versus a school counselor, because we have to remember all kids, we are talking to all different type of parents with all different type of issues, with all different type of concerns that they have about their child. And so that is something to keep in mind. Are you one that's just wanting to stick to a specific, group of kids and their parents, or are you want to deal with the whole school's parents, right? And when I say the whole schools, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be talking to every student's parents. Like, that's not the case. There are some that you might talk to more than others. Also, when you are a school counselor, you're more involved in the community and reaching out to the community for different things versus the teacher not really having to do so. Sorry, you guys, so my battery died on my camera, so now I'm on my phone, so bear with me. Generally, the teachers that's going to reach out to the school counselor to reach out to the community to get resources for their students. Whenever you're thinking about going into school counseling and when you're also thinking about transitioning out of school counseling to go to teaching, okay? Because maybe you don't want to do all that a school counselor does. So I hope that you guys was able to grasp hold to the information I was able to give to you guys today and kind of just, broaden your perspectives and helping you make your decision whether you're wanting to go ahead and move from teaching to school counseling or moving from school counseling into teaching. I thank you guys so much for your time. If you have not subscribed, make sure you subscribe and make sure you hit that notification bell so that you can be notified every time I upload a video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Thank you.